Good morning and welcome to the BlackUSA.News morning show. My name is Donnie Glover, publisher of both BlackUSA.News and BeMoreNews.com. Today we're joined with not just an educator, not just a leader, but he's been a very big supporter of our efforts over the past 20 years, the one and only Dr. Charles Simmons, founder and president, Sojourner-Douglass College. How are you, Dr. Simmons?
Doing fine, thank you. How are you this morning?
Man, we blessed by the best. What do you got on your wall? What's all of that behind you there?
Oh, these are things I've collected in my travels over the years. All these are African masks. I've been to, I don't know, 8 or 9 different countries in Africa over the years, negotiating linkages with colleges and universities and governments there.
So I want to go back to the beginning. Where are you from?
I'm from Baltimore. My parents are from Georgia, Gainesville, Georgia. But I was born and raised here in Baltimore, raised in the Edgar Allan Poe projects. They were built in 1938. My family moved in 1939, and we lived there until I went into the Marine Corps in 1955. My parents and family still live there after that.
So there's some famous people that come from Poe homes, if I'm not mistaken. Did Howard Pete Rawlins come from Poe homes?
Howard Pete Rawlins certainly did, yes.
Did Dan Henson live in Poe homes?
Dan Henson didn't. He lived there for a short while, yes.
Okay, so my history serves me correctly. Now, I want to get to some other early history. Now, Be More News has done some deep undercover investigative reporting, and we understand that you have a little Arab history. But in order to verify this, now I need to caution you, this is Be More News, and we have had former Arabers on. But were you an Araber?
I worked with them. I was not an Araber myself, but coming up in the projects, it was almost like a food desert. Although we had some grocery stores around and delicatessens, but jobs were hard to find for young black boys. And the Arabers were always there with their decorated carts and horses. And so on numerous occasions, I would go and work with them, selling watermelons. And, it was one of my watermelon.
That's what we want.
Got it red to the rhino red.
All right. You passed the pop quiz because we had to hear if you could do any Arab call, and that's a classic there. Can we hear it? Can we hear it again?
Watermelon, we got it red to the rhino red.
Oh man! Now there's one other examination that we have to give you before we get on to the interview. This is just to qualify you as 100% Baltimorean. Now you said you sold, according to your story, you sold Afro newspapers.
Yes, there was a fellow who lived across the street on Lexington Street, not in the projects, but right across the street from the projects, named Leon, and he was blind, and he had an Afro route, and he would get these young boys to work with him, and I mean, he was an amazing guy. He would put his hand on your shoulder, and off we would go, delivering Afros all over the place. I mean, he was very interesting.
So, did you have an Afro call?
We didn't have an Afro call.
Well, I say that because a few years back, Jake Oliver, what's that lady's name? She's going to kick my butt.
Uh-oh.
It'll come to me. Diane, they invited me to Afro boy / Afro girl celebration.
Okay.
And at this event, I learned of somebody named, or a call, Eddie O. And this was a popular call among the Afro boys, the
Say it
Afro
again.
girls.
Say it again.
Eddie O.
Eddie O. Not familiar with that one.
Okay. Well, anyway, so we talked about the early days, and you went to Booker T. What was the elementary school?
I went to Phyllis Wheatley Colored School.
Now, where was that?
It was on Waysher Street, which was right down near Fremont Avenue. It was torn down to build the high rise, the Lexington Terrace high rise.
Well, I didn't know about that. Phyllis
Yeah,
Wheatley.
Phyllis Wheatley.
Okay. Then you went on to
Booker T.
and then Frederick Douglass.
Yeah. And when I went to Frederick Douglass, originally Frederick Douglass was on Cary Street. And the school that's up on Gwynns Falls Parkway was the old Weston. And with integration, they built the new Weston for whites, and they moved the old Douglass from Cary Street to Gwynns Falls Parkway.
Now, this was at a time when Black people lived below North Avenue. So when you talk about Weston, I didn't notice Weston was at Douglass.
Right. Weston used to be at Douglass.
And that was a white neighborhood.
Yes.
Mondawmin was all white. I'm
not even sure if Mondawmin was built then.
Mondawmin wasn't built then. Right. Because eventually Mondawmin, that was Willie Adams had a lot to do with that, if I'm not mistaken.
Right, that's right. That's my understanding, yes.
So you grew up in a Baltimore, would you say that was empowering to Black people despite Jim Crow segregation?
I would say yes. Because of segregation, African Americans were forced to build their own companies. So we had a pretty thriving Black business community. Pennsylvania Avenue, we had the Royal Theater, we had movies, we had nightclubs, we had our own supermarkets. Providence Hospital was Black. There were 15 Black hospitals around the country. So segregation forced Black people to develop their own economic base and community base. So we all lived together. So we lived with teachers and preachers and shipyard workers and Sparrows Point workers and domestic workers. All were pretty much confined to the broader segregated African American community.
Baltimore will never be the same, though, huh?
Will never be the same, unless of course we understand the significance of self-determination and start banding together and working together to build an infrastructure that will support us as a people. And that's possible.
But that's what we've been trying to do for a long time.
That's what we taught. That's what we tried to do at Sojourner-Douglass College.
So tell us about it. How did Sojourner-Douglass come about?
Well, Antioch College out of Yellow Springs, Ohio, was always a pretty progressive school. Its first president was Horace Mann, who was a New England legislator who promulgated a lot of the early integration. Coretta Scott King and Eleanor Holmes Norton were graduates of Antioch. And they pressed the president, who was Jim Dixon at the time, to expand the opportunity for minorities to have access to not only education, but to build campuses and build Antioch campuses in their community to serve their people. Well, Walter P. Carter, I was a former Teamsters Union representative. And when I was a Teamsters Union representative, I worked with Walter P. Carter on numerous occasions. When I was trying to organize a company where African Americans were being mistreated, I would come to Walter, and he would put a picket line around the company to bring attention to what was happening. So I was very successful in organizing for the Teamsters Union. when we started the Left Bank Jazz Society, my brother and I and one of our friends, we would raise money. We would have concerts and raise money for Walter Carter and his efforts. And so Coretta Scott King contacted Walter Carter. He was the local Martin Luther King in the area. Coretta Scott King contacted him and said, I've convinced the president of Antioch to work with African American minority communities around the country. Do you have anybody in Baltimore interested in partnering with Antioch and setting up an Antioch branch campus? So Walter contacted me, and I contacted Alan Carter, who was working with me at the time, and we said, sure, let's do it. And so there was a Black woman, Gwen Jones Davis, who had an Antioch Center up in, I think, New Hampshire. And she worked with us as she tutored us to get through this process. So in 1972, we set up a branch campus of Antioch up in the Homestead Montebello community. So it was the Homestead Montebello Center of Antioch College. Homestead Montebello community is up near Morgan.
Cold Spring Lane.
Cold Spring Lane, right, that's right. So we set up the Homestead Montebello Center of Antioch with the express purpose of eventually spinning off and becoming independent. So we started with about 8 students. We didn't have financial aid. Students could pay whatever they wanted. We started in a parish house of a church on the corner of 30th and Hillen Road, which was a formerly white church where the white parishioners had moved out and turned the church over to the Black community. So we started in that parish house, and then we used our GI Bill to buy a couple of houses on Asquith Street. And in 1980, we spun off and changed the name to Sojourner-Douglass, honoring Sojourner Truth and Frederick Douglass. So our focus was always on self-determination, even in the name of the college. And, Sojourner Truth was a liberated, helped slaves escape, liberate slaves. Frederick Douglass fought for freedom and equality. So our focus.
Was there ever a point where it was almost Tubman Douglas, considering this is Baltimore and Harriet Tubman had roots here?
What? Say that again. Was a court when we did what?
Before Sojourner-Douglass, did Tubman Douglas ever come to mind?
We thought about, yes, we thought about Tubman Douglas. But we talked about it within the community, and Sojourner-Douglass won out because of her role in freeing slaves and self-determination, and that was and Tubman was critical in that movement and in that era as well. But we had input from the broader community, and Sojourner-Douglass ended up being the name.
Now Sojourner-Douglass expanded all the way to the Bahamas.
Right. We set up campuses. We had a campus in Prince George's County. We had one on the Eastern Shore. We had where else? We had one in another county in Baltimore. We set up one in Nassau, Bahamas.
You on the Eastern Shore?
Pardon?
Were you on the Eastern Shore?
We were on the Eastern Shore, in Cambridge and Salisbury.
Tell me about that, man, because I get a little nervous. We talking about Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman, where they come from down that neck of the woods. I've been down there, and I'm not comfortable. I don't have a gun. Maybe if I had a gun, I would feel comfortable. I felt like it was one of them sundown towns.
Let me tell you, one of the reasons I wanted to set up one on Eastern Shore is when I was a Teamsters Union representative, I tried to organize a company on Eastern Shore. And when we were outside around the company, handing out leaflets and pamphlets when shift would change. We had several people in pickup trucks with their Confederate flag in the back window riding around us, and one of them got out with a rifle and came to my face and said, "If you don't get your black ass out of this area by night, you're going to be dead." And we ended up again with Walter Carter putting pickets around the place, and we ended up organizing that company. But I was convinced that I wanted to do something more on the Eastern Shore. And as first chance we got, we set up a campus in Cambridge and Salisbury on the Eastern Shore, and served that community well. Number of graduates on the Eastern Shore. In fact, I talked to one of our center directors just a couple of days ago. She called me. We haven't spoken in years. She'd moved somewhere in the South, worked with another institution. And we just had a conversation about 2 days ago.
Yeah, Doc, you're a bad man. I don't play around down that Eastern Shore. Plus, you got to go over the bridge. Kind of remind me of Cherry Hill. You know, one way in, one way out. I'm from North Avenue. It just don't add up in my mind. You know, I need an escape route.
That's right. You're absolutely right. And I tell you, when that guy told me to be off the Eastern Shore by dark, I was out of there by dark.
Then you gotta tell me twice. I'm gonna be across that bridge before the sun go down.
That's
and
right.
They got some great seafood. Let me tell you, I've had the biggest crabs in my life. But Doc, I gotta get to this. I was a commissioner with the state on this African American history. There is so much Black history on the Eastern Shore. It's more Black history than Baltimore.
Yes, and you're right. You know, Harriet Tubman was there, and there's still Harriet Tubman monument there, and Harriet Tubman facility. You know, with the Harriet's history. But you're absolutely right. There's a lot of African American history on the Eastern Shore.
And I mean, Black people owning property.
Yes.
Black people owning businesses.
Yes. Yes. Because the same thing I mentioned earlier. When you're confined, when you can't participate in the broader economy and the broader culture, you're forced to develop your own. And the Eastern Shore, as you said, was a confined area. And even when integration was so-called flourishing around in other places, it was still a confined area on the Eastern Shore, and it forced Black people to develop their own systems and economy. So you're absolutely right.
Now, my favorite thing, besides the crab cakes and the crabs down there on the Eastern Shore, my favorite thing about the Eastern Shore is the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass when they talk about Frederick Douglass being sent to a nigger breaker, Mr. Covey.
Right.
Where Frederick Douglass turned around and broke his back. That is, honest to God, my favorite story ever.
That's right. That's right. Absolutely. And that's one of the reasons why we wanted Frederick Douglass' name to stay out there, and wanted to associate with that name, with Frederick Douglass, because he was not only was he a champion of freedom for African Americans, but he was involved in our area. You know, in Maryland.
Doc, let me just get to it. You have done, I don't know anyone else who has done what you've done. Now, granted, you got a team, you got family, you got brothers, you know, everybody, you got a strong network around you. But you, from Poe Holmes, went on to develop colleges, a college with campuses in other places, including the Bahamas. Why?
That's a good question. I don't know. I was driven. You know, I guess my whole life was centered around making something happen for our people. I left high school. I played football in high school. I left high school. I went to the Marine Corps. I was exposed to segregation and racism in the Marine Corps. In boot camp, I had one other African American from Baltimore in my boot camp in
This
1955.
was Montford Point.
Huh?
This was Montford Point.
No, Paris Island.
Paris Island.
Paris Island, South Carolina. And so his name was Robert Jones. And Robert and I were standing around talking. And so there were only about 7 or 8 African Americans in my platoon. And everybody else is standing around talking to each other. Robert Jones and I standing around talking. And the drill instructor came up and said, "Break it up, Gold Dust Twins." And I don't know if you're old enough to remember, there was a soap powder years ago called the Gold Dust. It had a picture of two silhouettes of two blacks with big lips and beady hair and very black, and it was the Gold Dust. Look it up sometimes. Called the Gold Dust, and he called us the Gold Dust Twins. I mean, that's the kind of racism we were subjected to. In my advanced training, the drill instructor looked around, and he picked out a dark-skinned African American and said, "From now on, your name is Midnight." And he looked around and picked another, and "You're half past midnight." So this is 1955 in the United States Marine Corps. So I've been subjected to that kind of attitude, which drove me to resist and do something about it. Coming out of the Marine Corps, I worked, as I mentioned, I worked as a Teamsters Union representative, organizing African Americans to do better for themselves, to join the union. I worked closely with Walter Carter when Walter Carter when he was doing civil rights activities, when he needed some support, I would help organize the community to get, people out to work with him. When I needed support, he would bring pickets and work with me. So I guess it's just a matter of my exposure to people like Walter Carter and the civil rights movement during that time, which drove me and motivated me to want to continue to do something for our community.
No, Doc, it was either your parents or your grandparents. Somebody instilled something in you long before you went to Semper Fi, before you went away to college. Somebody else nurtured. Who else was it, Doc?
Donnie, remember, I don't know if one of the things that happened when I was growing up in the Poe projects, since we were so segregated, was in the projects there was an assembly hall, and you couldn't move in there unless you had if you were a family had a husband and wife were together, unless you were a widow or widower. And they had a men's club and a women's club. And the men's club and the women's club invited the young boys and the young girls to sit in on their meetings. So they would come home from work and they would have meetings in the community to deal with issues in the community. They forced the housing authority, which was segregated during those days. There was a white projects and black projects, and they forced the housing authority to build basketball courts in the area, which was formerly a parking area for kids to play in. There were, in the surrounding communities, there were young, older African Americans who established baseball teams and football teams, and the projects was like a community, would draw people to the project. So we were already exposed. We were playing ball and playing basketball. We were setting in on meetings as kids with adults who were working on solving problems for the community. And so I think when you're exposed to that as a young person, you imbued with that movement, with that effort to do something, to make a difference. And I think that's what happened to a number of us. Look at Pete Rollins, and there were several of the people who came out of the community, our community, who ended up giving back to the community because of the exposure as a youngster to that kind of self-determination, to that kind of effort to improve your community and the lives of people in your community.
Were you ever a Garveyite?
I was a history major, so I studied Garvey in high school, in school, in elementary and in high school. I was a history major, and when I first went to college in Morgan, I was still a history major. When I changed over to Antioch, I started community development and economic development. But originally, I was a history major, and I did study Garvey and was impressed, very impressed with the work that he did in trying to move our community towards self-determination. Yes.
What about J.A. Rogers? Did he have any impression on you?
He did. As I said, being a history major, I was very influenced by all of the African Americans who tried to give something back to the community. J. Rogers was one of them. Garvey was one of them. Booker T. Washington was one of them. So yes,
Yep.
and I think that's important. I'm glad you raised that because I think that's important because I think that that's the kind of education and exposure that we must give, prepare our young people to develop our community. I agree with you 100%.
I learned of this one Baltimorean. He owned the Smith Hotel. And this was in the early 1900s. His name was Thomas Smith. And the hotel was down there on Drew Hill and Jasper Street, down there where the Afro building was.
Right.
And he also had a saloon. Now, I may be getting the story a little jumbled, but he's in the Maryland archives. His name's Tom Smith. He was the largest Black hotelier in the United States. He was Maryland's largest Black contributor to the then Republican Party. And back then, the Republicans were the Democrats.
Right, right.
And he was also involved in the lucky number business. And this was before Willie Adams.
Okay, I was just going to raise Willie Adams' name because that's what he did. He helped sponsor a number of businesses, I don't know about hotels, bars and restaurants and grocery stores. Yes, put a lot of people in business.
So my question is, what do you recall about Black business growing up?
Well, one of the points that I help try to talk to people about is that this whole notion of segregation forces a community, and you can look around the country where you had flourishing Black business communities. Many of them were burnt down. Tulsa, Oklahoma, Greenwood, but in Baltimore, we had a thriving Black business community, and in large measure, some of that was due to the philanthropic support of Lou Willie Adams. But we had a thriving Black business community, the Royal Theater. We had 3 or 4 Black theaters. We had Black grocery stores. We had supermarkets. We had a Providence Hospital, Black hospital. So during those days, before integration, we had a thriving Black community. Unfortunately, with integration, although I'm not against integration, but with integration, we stopped patronizing our own businesses and started going to the white businesses, and our businesses closed. from lack of support. Um, but we had a thriving Black business community. Pennsylvania Avenue, for example, all kind of shoe stores, clothing stores. Um, we had everything we needed, pretty much. Grocery stores, supermarkets. We had stalls in the market up on Pennsylvania Avenue. Um, it's a shame now that we're still struggling now to get. Even when we start Black businesses, a struggle to get our community to support our businesses.
Well, Dr. Simmons, that's why I am forever a fan of yours, because you supported me from the very beginning. Be More News will be 20 years old this year, but you were there every step of the way. You pushed our radio show, and I know I can have some opinions, but you never bother me once, and I will always be a fan of yours. And that's why you're here today. We want you to know that we are so grateful and so proud. I know so many students that they tell me they don't even know what I know, but they tell me about their Sojourner experience. And invariably there's a smile and there's a gratefulness of having a place to go where you're treated like a human being, especially older students. How did you hone in on the older student?
Well, one of the things that I realized when I looked at the traditional historically Black colleges and universities was that they served the traditional, high school graduate. And as I mentioned earlier, my experience growing up in the community where we had community, projects was like a village, and I recognize that one of the things that can move our culture forward is if we could educate the adults to impact the children. That the absence of education is critical in our community, and to move it, I think that we need to educate people, especially the mother, because the mother has the greatest impact, I believe, on the children. And if we can educate the parent, the mother, then that is passed on to the children. And so I looked around and I saw that the Black colleges serve the traditional college age student. And so we said, well, let's bridge this gap and serve the adult population, because if we can serve the adult population, we got a leg up on the youth. And so that's what we did. We went after the adult population. We created classes during the day and in the evening and on the weekend so that adults who work could still study. We were early on in some of our before online education became the thing that it is now. And we set campuses up around the state and we partnered with a school in Suriname, South America. We helped start that school, get that school started. We set up our own campus in the Bahamas. So we reached out to that population because we knew that population could have the greatest impact on the young child and the young student.
So, Doc, the question is, well, let me give it to you. A friend of mine sent me a text some time ago, and he asked me about, and I'm going to pose this question to you. There are a number of institutions in, let me just do this right. There are a number of colleges in the area, and more than ever, and we're very proud of our Black college presidents. Here it is. From Morgan, University of Baltimore, Morgan, University of Baltimore, UMBC, College Park, Coppin, Bowie, St. Mary's, UDC, Howard University. Now I mentioned 9 college presidents. There was a book, and you know better than me. Was it, which one of those books? I think it was Ralph Ellison. They talked about the college president. Not you, of course.
I think you're right. I'm not sure, but I believe you're right.
But they painted a picture of the college president as opposed to being a liberator, like we view you. The college president was more of an overseer.
Oh, well.
Well, I'm not you. Okay, let me say it like this. I remember seeing you with, and at that time there might have been 4 other, might have been 5 of y'all. It was one of them fancy hotels downtown, and the 5, you and 4 other the HBCU presidents in Maryland gathered downtown. What I'm saying is, now we got 9 college presidents between Baltimore and DC. We think back to education, how important it is to have, how difficult it is to get. Doc, what is the role of the Black college president these days? Is it still to be the liberator?
That's my understanding. Now I'm not familiar with the concept that you're espousing about them being overseers. I'm not that familiar with some of the current college presidents and what they're doing, but I know back in the day in the struggle, Earl Richardson, for example, Calvin Burnett, when they were president at Morgan and Coppin, look what Earl did. Earl started that lawsuit, which just resulted just recently in a multi-million-dollar settlement for the HBCUs in Maryland. So I'm, you know,
Dr. Burnett, to his credit, he did something unpopular. He got support from the Republican Ehrlich, and Coppin consequently got more money than it ever got before. But that's almost innate when you talk about Earl Richardson. I remember seeing him going down the road to Annapolis, and his car was going faster than mine. He wasn't driving, but he was about getting to Annapolis. When I think of what you've done, you've been about serving the people. Dr. Burnett, a lot of people don't know this, he would walk from Coppin to the harbor and back every day. And that tells me of an on-the-ground commitment, just like you did in East Baltimore, to the people. And I'm just wondering, you know, because now we have our PhDs, I'm Dr. So-and-so. It's almost like we've forgotten the role of education. I thought it was about the empowerment, not about creating a new generation of slaves. When I think back to the father of Black History Month, Dr. Carter G. Woodson, in the miseducation of the Negro, he gave the classic example. One of his friend's sons went to school, and the purpose of him going to college was to get that education and to bring it back home. Now, what did I just miss in 50 years of education, big brother?
Well, I don't know, because I don't know. I'm not familiar with the concept that you're raising now about the current Black college presidents. I know that Morgan is still moving ahead. I just talked to Calvin Burnett yesterday. He'll be 90 years old, his next birthday this year. He was out in his yard gardening at 89 years old. You know,
the fight is not over.
The fight is not over. Absolutely not.
When I look at some of the institutions, I've always gotten the concept of empowerment from Sojourner, but I'm not sure that is the same mindset. I think now you don't build robots, you build thinkers, critical thinkers. You wouldn't have built a Sojourner-Douglass being a robot. The average Joe is not going to do that. The average Joe is going to fall in line and follow the path that's been laid. You are a trendsetter. I don't know that I'm seeing that
Well,
I don't know.
The movement was different then. We were all, the community was in the struggle. We were coming out of the civil rights movement. We had the Panthers. Everything was. That was a time when consciousness was extremely high, and it still is now with the new Black Power movement. But we had, you have over history, you have movements, then you have a lull, then you have movements, then you have a lull. I'm not suggesting that the Black college presidents are developing robots. I'm just trying to look at the history evolution of movements, and it comes and goes, and so you have higher levels of consciousness at some points, phases of history. Then we get some of what we ask for, and then the movement settles down. Something happens like George Floyd, and the movement starts up again. So throughout history, we have these surges, we have these ups and downs.
Here's my toughest question ever for a Black college president. You ready?
I'm ready.
I was going to Morehouse. I was paying the people $8,000 a year, student loans, of course. And that was back in '83, only to get to my physical science class over at Clark, and a white professor told me the Greeks had developed the principles of math and science. I almost lost my religion.
I understand. And being a history major, I can understand that. I mean, we were building pyramids. We had to know math and science long before anybody else.
Oh, that's not it. Then at Morgan in grad school, a white professor told me the Greeks had the first civilizations. Why am I paying premium to get a white lie?
Yeah, I can't respond to that.
I almost had to call my bail bondsman. But what I'm saying is, we have to be mindful. My daddy said, use your head for something other than a hat rack.
Right.
Yes, we want access. We want to be around the quote unquote best. But if we're not using that common sense that grandma gave, I could have all the degrees in the world on the wall. But without that grandma, that mother wit, that common sense,
right,
none of it means anything.
Right. And that's why history has to be real. You can look now, what is called the 1619 Project, where the administration is trying to stop the teaching of 1619 Project, to talk about Europeans bringing slaves, and enslaving the world almost. But you're right. I mean, we were building pyramids when nobody else was doing anything. We had trade. We were trading with each other. We were circumnavigating the globe even before Columbus.
Yes, before slavery. The first Black people in modern time in America were free.
Right, long before slavery. Oh yeah, yeah. Slavery. We didn't start slavery until Europeans started leaving the Caucasus Mountains, leaving Europe, and traveling around the world. They developed arms and gunpowder from the Chinese, and
So let's talk about that. Where do you see Africa over the next 20 years? The internet is changing the game. This Bitcoin and this BitChain, this new electronic currency is changing the game. People are becoming more conscientious. So now if something happens tragically in Belgium, I'm seeing more people saying, hold up. Isn't that where King Leopold came from? The one who was cutting off hands in the Congo? So I'm seeing Black people worldwide becoming more conscientious about the decisions that we make. But where do you see Africa? Because we all know it is the future.
I think, as you said, there are more and more Africans are becoming conscious of the need to move towards self-determination. There are more and more African Americans who are leaving America and relocating to Africa, and that is having a significant impact on the consciousness of Africans. And there are a lot of Africans now who are taking up the mantle for self-determination. I look at some of the, we've had, people, Mandela, but there are more Mandelas out there who are moving towards. I went to Durban for the United Nations Conference Against Racism, Durban, South Africa. So consciousness is people are beginning to understand the need for self-determination around the world. And so I think Africa is a place where we're going to see a lot of leadership, Black leadership, emerging again real soon.
Now, Doc, you worked in a number of capacities, but I didn't know you used to work for the city of Baltimore.
I worked for the health department. Yes, I was a health educator.
Well, Doc, I got to ask you about mental health in Baltimore today.
We're at a critical stage. And I don't know what's driving this new issue of
yes, you do.
Health.
Yes, you do.
Mental health issue.
Well,
segregation is part of it. Oppression is part of it. I mean, you look at Black people being killed all over the country. But I think I look at the movement. There's still an emerging movement. The Black Lives Matter movement is a strong movement, and it's getting stronger. And not only do you have young Black people driving the movement, but you have white people joining the movement. So I think we're going to soon see a reckoning.
But we need the elders involved. We need the youth's energy, but we need the wisdom of you. We need the wisdom of your peers.
I agree.
We need them both. We need that young, vibrant, strong, energy, but it must have wisdom, because otherwise we'll make the same mistakes we made before.
I agree.
And you know how they get us? They say, look here, Dr. Simmons, here, take this $200,000, and I just want you to not talk to Donnie Glover for a year.
Yeah, I don't think that's going to happen. I do see young people and old people coming together, older people coming together in this new movement. There's always a push. There's always a push to stop it. You look at what happened with the Black Panthers. They killed them off, went in, broke into the house and killed them in their sleep. But that doesn't stop a movement. I think it's going to ebb and flow, and I think now we're in the late beginning of a movement that's going to carry us to the next level. And we're going to have older people and young people involved. You're always going to have some plants to get in there and create problems, so that the system can say, "Oh, you're destructive." A lot of these are infiltrators, purposefully doing these things. But that's not going to stop us. That's not going to stop this movement.
Here's a question from Baltimore County, Derek Burnett. Do you think Africa will ever develop its own currency like the euro?
I think eventually, yes. I'm not sure if it will, but as I said, there is a movement even in Africa and in around the world towards self-determination. And as we reclaim our independence, I think, yes, eventually Africa will. And Africa eventually will invite African Americans back home, and we'll have solidarity around the world.
We need a united.
That doesn't mean that we're against white people. That just means that we're for ourselves. We see the need of supporting ourselves and each other.
I foresee the United States of Africa, and one of the first things I foresee with that is the United States of Africa military.
Well, you know, we have military movements developing now to protect the demonstrators. I don't know if you've seen some of that.
Oh, we saw them.
Black militias, yeah.
NFAC, the Not Messing Around crew. That's not their name, but they ain't messing around.
Right. So I think, you know, there'll be equality will emerge around the world.
So, Doc, I got to share this with you. When I was a young man up at lived up on Moreland Avenue, Mondawmin was the nearest mall, and it was the first time I'd ever seen a fraternity.
Okay.
And these brothers came walking through Mondawmin Mall. I'm no teeny bopper from North Avenue, 14, 15. You know, Mondawmin was the place to be, especially if they ever had the Travis Winky fashion show. Oh my God, everybody would go crazy. But this one particular day, down there in the old part where the black man had the photo store down there by Charlie Rudo, I remember these brothers coming in, and they were dressed in army fatigues, and they had on black boots. And I later learned that was your fraternity.
Omega Psi Phi.
Yeah, they were. You know, I saw the pretty boys with the canes. I saw, you know, the little intellectual cats. But the Omegas, you know, I come from North Avenue. We respect something like that. Yes, they were orderly, in order.
Yes.
And Lord, don't let them bust out in them dance moves.
You're absolutely right.
What made you choose Omega Psi Phi? And friendship is essential to the soul. That's what they taught me.
That's right. Well, there are a number of friends of mine, including the principal, the former principal of the elementary school that my children attended. And a number of friends of mine were Omegas. And I was impressed with the work they were doing in the community. I was impressed with their concept and their ideas. And it was I think it was a fit. It was a natural fit for me. And some of my brothers, Jim Griffin, who was also a member of the board of directors of Sojourner-Douglass College, he and I were initiated at the same time. Melvin Fawcett, who was then a principal of one of the local high schools that was doing a significant job in our community, was also on the line with me when we were initiated. So it was I think it was just a natural fit for me.
Okay, I got one more question from Derek Burnett, and then we're going to get your final thoughts. Derek wants to know your thoughts on China's infiltration of Africa.
Well, everybody is trying to infiltrate Africa. Africa is rich with minerals, with everything that the world needs. and everybody's going to try to exploit it. And that's why it's essential. That's why it's critical that African Americans, especially conscious African Americans, identify and work with Africa, and even try to live there. Um, I've visited, I don't know, maybe 8 or 9 different African countries, negotiating linkages. I think it's important that we find a way to link African Americans, Africans around the world with Africa, and support Africa, support those progressive governments in Africa, to move there if we want, and if we don't want to live there permanently, to set up residence there. I know there are a number of people now who, even if they don't stay there permanently, are establishing residence there. The opportunity is there, and there are a number of organizations in Africa and leaders in Africa trying to invite African Americans and Africans in the diaspora to come back, to bring our skills, to bring our resources back to Africa to help in the development of Africa and the African consciousness around the world. So I think it's important that Africans around the world link back with Africa and help develop Africa. Take the skills that we have, take the revenue that we have, take the resources that we have back to Africa, and let's create a worldwide movement, the same way that others are doing it. Everybody's trying to exploit, but we should be the saviors, not exploit Africa, but work with Africa and work with our Africans around the world. And I think that's the only way that we, not just Africans or African Americans, but Black people all over the world, are going to survive long term.
And that means some forgiveness on our parts, like Joseph in the Bible.
That's right. And forgiveness on our parts. They have to forgive us. We have to forgive them. There's a notion that there were Africans who helped sell Africans off to the slaveholders. I don't know how true any of that is.
It's true, because some of their cousins and relatives live around us today. Doc, what can people do to help you? What's next?
Well, we're trying. I sit at my computer every day writing proposals, sending out proposals, trying to raise the resources to get the school back up and running. I have a corporation, Global Education Service, and so I'm looking at launching Sojourner-Douglass Global College. Now we don't need as much money as we had in 2015. We had in excess of a $30 million budget, but we had facilities. We had 160,000 square foot building in East Baltimore, 230,000 square foot buildings over in East Baltimore near the harbor and Johns Hopkins. But with distance learning now, we don't need that kind of, we don't need that for those kind of facilities. We need office space. We can do online learning. So we're trying to raise the resources to get the school back up and running. I'm still in touch with a lot of our board members, with our faculty members, students, and graduates still call me. As I talk to them almost every day, to somebody almost every day. What can we do to help? We have people helping to write parts of the proposal. I have a list of alumni sending me statements, pictures and statements of their experience at Sojourner-Douglass College. And so I'm putting all of that together, and I'm sending out proposals, trying to raise the resources to get us back in business, because it's still needed.
Doc, I'm seeing online universities, white online universities, pop up out of nowhere. They pop up out of nowhere, and they claim they've been around for 100 years. And I'm
Right.
like, how you do that? You just come out with something. You say, well, we've been around for 150 years. How you do that?
Don't ask me. Marketing is something these
Doc,
days.
is there any information you want me to put out here? Contact information for anybody that wants to get in touch with you or show their support for the future of Sojourner-Douglass?
My email address is C as in Charles Simmons, SIMMONS, at mail, MAIL, .SDC, as in Sojourner Douglass College, .edu, as in education. If you send me some contact information, I will send you copies of the proposal we're putting out. I'll send you information on what we're trying to do. That's it. C. Simmons at mail.sdc.edu. I'd love to hear from you. Any way you can help us would be appreciated. As I said, we're not going to stop until we get, until we're back in business. Frederick Douglass said, if there's no struggle, there's no progress. So, and that's what we do.
My favorite is power concedes nothing without demand.
It never has and it never will.
It never will. And also that one about tyrants. The limits of tyrants pretty much set by the people they bully. So when you get tired of getting bullied, you'll beat up the bully.
That's right.
Now, here's from the book of Donnie Glover. The only thing a bully understands is an alley apple. I learned that in East Baltimore. We love you, Charles Simmons. Thank you for all that you do. Thank you for the bright light that you are to so many of us. And on behalf of all of them, thank you for all you have done for us.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And you keep up the good work.
Yes, sir.
You're my inspiration.
Bless the Lord.
Thank you so much.
Baltimore, we'll be back tonight, 7 p.m. for Sister Biz. Keep watching BlackUSA.News. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you. You have a great day, everyone.